Welcome to this month's Cor-Kinetic newsletter, and what we wanted to show you in this quick video is just a really simple assessment we use to understand a little bit more about the hips, and specifically for this test, more about the hips in the transverse plane. Now, the transverse plane is one of the most important areas of human movement, simply because so much of our movement happens in the transverse plane. When we start to understand how motor control and the brain works in terms of movement, we start to see that the cerebellum, the area that is really utilised during movement, that integrates all our senses together, including the proprioceptive, really loves to get transverse plane stimulation. It really upregulates it, so it's a really important place. So our assessment, and all of our assessments at Cor-Kinetic, are about understanding motor patterns and movement rather than anatomical structures. What happens in terms of movement when we're standing versus when we're lying or seated is massively different, and we can't emphasise that enough. When I stand up and my movement is integrated with ground reaction forces, momentum, gravity, when my motor patterns become more challenged and more active, the information I get back is very different to when I'm lying down and moving people passively through a range of movement. You know, and in fact, a lot of the time, what really highlights the difference between people's ability to move is that from lying down to standing up. What's the difference between the two? What's the disparity? Because so often, if I have movement and I can't control it and I can't use it, that's going to kind of predispose me to injury and to inefficiency and all the other things that are kind of the enemy of human movement. So it's really important we start to see the difference between what's happening in a lying down, passive, single range, single plane situation and what's happening in a very active, dynamic, multi-dimensional, upright, and even sometimes challenged a little bit more scenario. And what I mean by challenged more is that we're going to have a single leg component to this assessment. And when we're assessing single leg, it can sometimes highlight things that we can mask when we're bilateral. So the reason for assessing movement or motor patterns is that often people over the years pick up these niggling injuries. They pick up ankle injuries, hip injuries, wrist injuries, anywhere you can think of, that people don't take so much notice of. Some other injuries they pick up, the, kind of major injuries that they'll tell you about, or they sometimes forget to tell you about, but all of them create a situation where it changes the way that the brain perceives and understands and controls and creates movement. What we have to remember is that previous injury affects future movement, not just in terms of a fibrotic or structural level, but also in terms of the way that the body creates protective movement patterns. If I sprain my ankle and I get that limp, has that limp ever been fully restored back to optimal movement? The gold standard of any kind of therapy seems to be getting people out of pain. And what we need to realise is that we need to rehab their movement as well. Getting out of pain isn't enough. At Cor-Kinetic, what we're looking to do is understand people's movement better and looking to understand where they get these protective patterning and where they get this protective patterning. And what we can do is to restore movement and confidence, both the kind of the sensory areas of the cortex to the movement-based areas of the cortex, and how they interact more with the anatomical and structural areas, the kind of bits of meat that we majorly seem to assess. So let's have a quick look at this assessment, and it's really simple. One of the big things I want to look at the difference of is my ability to move when I'm on two legs versus my ability to move when I'm on one leg. You know, when we create that stability demand, which we create all the time, in fact, gait is somewhere between like 50 and 55% of the time on one leg with the stability demand. When we have that increased stability demand, are we able to tolerate it and control it versus when we're on two legs, let alone when we're lying down? So that disparity between lying down, seated, standing, and then finally being on a single leg can really show our ability to move in an authentic way and our ability and confidence in controlling and creating motion. And we really need to be able to have more assessment tools in the toolbox. So our assessment is simply looking at the transverse plane movement of my left hip. And what we're going to do is look at internal rotation. We're going to do it on two legs, and we're going to do it on a single leg. So first thing that I'm going to do is just bring my foot out in front of me. So what we have to remember is that internal rotation, generally in my hips, is actually created by my pelvis moving over my femur rather than my femur moving against my pelvis. So we're going to do it in a more authentic manner. So I'm going to put my foot out in front of me, and all I'm going to do is rotate my leg round, my right leg round, to assess my left hip as far as I can and see where I get to. And I feel comfortable about there. And if I straighten my foot up, that's probably just beyond 45. We're going to say maybe that's 50, maybe we're going to say it's 55, which is okay, it's average. But what I really want to find out is that better or worse than my right side? So I'm going to go onto my other side, and I'm going to come around. And actually, we can see that I can come a lot further round on my right side. I'll probably get somewhere about 60 or 65. So that definitely highlights a movement disparity in the transverse plane between my left and my right hips, which is, it's always going to be significant. At Cor-Kinetic, we're not really looking for symmetry. I look for a larger asymmetry. And what I mean by that is I'm looking for something that really pops out and kind of slaps me in the face, if you like. I'm looking for something that really highlights a difference, rather than these kind of minute differences that we look for when we talk about symmetry. We're looking for a large asymmetry versus any kind of asymmetry. So what we're now going to do is say, well, left side, that's worse. So if I stand on a single leg, does it get significantly worse? Is there an issue, a stability problem within my left hip? We know that good movement has a stability issue and a mobility issue. I need to be stable to be mobile. And there's no point in being mobile without being stable. So they're kind of a very symbiotic collective of things. So let me take myself onto a single leg, and again we're going to do the same action. I'm just going to rotate round around my left hip, but actually I get to about there now. And as you can see, I'm starting to lose stability. So out of that, say, 50 or 55 degrees, that actually I'm probably using less than 45 of it when I increase a stability command. So the difference there between how I am when I'm standing on two legs versus one leg, and when I'm standing on two legs, obviously I've got more points of attachment, so I've got more stability. When I take those points of attachment away, we see a great difference in my ability to move over my left hip. You know, when I get into a gate, which is a single leg scenario, exactly like that, as I step forward, pelvis rotating over the femur, that, you know, I'm going to need to have that movement. If I lay myself down on a bed, or someone was to lay me down on a bed, and move my hip through a range of motion in the transverse plane, maybe internally rotate it, as we just tested, it might be that I could use even more than the 55% I got when I was on two legs. It might be passively, a practitioner could move me through, say, 60, 65 degrees. When I become active and under my own motor pattern control, we found that that went down to kind of, 50 degrees. And then when I got onto a single leg, it went down below 45, 40 degrees. So we can see that if I was to assess someone in a passive way, that there might be a 25 to 30 degree disparity between what I can actively use in a situation that demands mobile stability versus passive, someone moving me through a joint range, kind of in a low threshold, low threat situation, where I may get like 60 degrees. There's a massive disparity. So that might be something, if we only use that kind of passive table-based methodology to assess people, we're missing a lot about their movement potential. You cannot assess someone's movement without seeing them move. Otherwise, you're just guessing. And we saw that, and that was highlighted right there. You know, if I was to have a look at my internal rotation on a bed, it would only be a guess of what I'm actually able to control and use in a dynamic situation. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope that made some sense, and I hope that you can see the kind of viewpoint that we're discussing. Thank you so much.